Good afternoon. Welcome again to When This Is Over by ITURRI. I'd like to welcome everybody. I'd love to welcome our guests. And this time we're going back to our roots. So today we will discuss safety when this is over. And we have fantastic guests, our own Daniel Rivera and two of his guests that he has invited to meet us. And just as a short introduction, Daniel is the head of economics and consulting in ITURRI. He has developed his whole career around safety with different moments of safety at work, industrial hygiene, ergonomics, and safety behaviors. And now in the ergonomics department, he is our own personal guru. Joining him today, two fantastic guests. And as I've told them, I'm not even trying to pretend I'm not reading it. So I have prepared a short bio for both of them with their achievements. Dr. Schneider is the director of the medical and biotech section at Fraunhofer IPA in Stuttgart in his own interdisciplinary biomechatronics department. He also serves as the head of human technology interaction department in IFF, University of Stuttgart, and teaches medical device mechatronics at Stuttgart University. Just one of his great developments, the Stuttgart ExoJacket prototype, is currently tested in various industrial assembly and logistics functions, as well as being re-engineered for new therapy approaches with neurosurgeons and hand surgeons. Our second guest from the United States, Mr. Joe Hitt. He is recognized internationally as an expert in robotic technologies and human systems, starting the first of its kind Wearable Robotics Trade Association and participating in multiple government, private and academic panels and boards. He has created the world's first bionic running leg showcased in Discovery Channel with Special Forces amputee running at 3.6 meters per second, 4 months after losing his limb. He has developed many more other developments, which he's definitely going to talk about today, hopefully. Gentlemen, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta, for this precise presentation. I only wanted today to talk about safety after that, safety when this is over, with two friends of mine that are used to think differently. So they are used to work in innovation related to safety. That's why I choose them to talk today. And well, I have written a short article that you can find in whenthisisover.iturri.com, telling a little bit my opinion about three different aspects of safety when this is over. And what I want now is to ask them what do they think about that. To start, of course, there's no doubt that this crisis will represent a change in the future. How safety will be affected by this change? Of course, we don't know, but we want to think about that. Let's start, for example, by PPE. After all my career in safety, chasing workers to convince them to use personal protection equipment, I have been surprised that in these days that people was claiming for PPE to use it. So that's one of the first effects that I realized of in the crisis. And of course, I see that as an opportunity because general people has approached a little bit more to PPE. So I want to ask our two guests, what do they think about it? We can start, for example, by Joe, if you want. Do you think that this phenomenon will change the way that workers think about personal protection equipment? And this will represent finally to have fewer failures in the use of PPE?
Yeah, first of all, thank you again, Danny, for inviting me to be here with you. The questions you asked are very interesting, and it's one where we really should think through and figure out ways to account for the positive changes and then try to make them lasting changes. I truly believe that. So in answering this question, I wanted to kind of talk about the need for PPE is increasing. I think it's increasing with regard to infectious disease. You know, it's been 4 years since Zika. It's been 5 years since Ebola. It's been 10 years since H1N1 flu. And it's been almost 100 years since H1N1, the other different H1N1 flu killed over 50 million people worldwide. Those viruses were known, but no one knew when they were triggered. Now we have SARS, MERS, and HIV, which emerged out of nowhere. So I think that the pace is increasing. You know, virus has to match its key to a lock in a human cell. So it's a key and a lock. It's mathematical, it's statistical. You could think of it as a lottery. And what we're seeing is that more and more wildlife that are separated by continents are brought together in markets around the world. And more people are exposed to that. So just statistically, the exposure is increasing at exponential rates. So the need for PPE is increasing. Today, we know of about 4,000 viruses in animals. There are probably millions more beyond that. But for it to jump from an animal to human, it's like once out of tens of billions of encounters with one virus out of millions of potential virus. But that probability is increasing. You know, SARS-CoV-2 is a virus that we didn't know about 3 years ago, but it has come from animals into humans. So that need is increasing. And we really need to think about positive changes. I think the one challenge that we have as we think about personal protective equipment in a broader sense is that most of the transmission that we know that's occurred, like for example here in COVID-19, were from pre or asymptomatic people. So people before their symptoms came on, or there is a large population who have no symptoms. So that's the challenge. As we think about PPE, we need to broaden the definition of personal protective equipment from masks and gloves and physical barriers and cleaning equipment, soap and water and boots, to other types of personal protective equipment that addresses the threat in a relevant way. And I think one of them is pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic. In a analysis of 77 infector-infectee pairs in China, researchers calculated that contagiousness started 2.3 days before symptoms. 2.3 days before symptoms, and it peaked 0.7 days before symptoms. So the bottom line is, you know, let's think about PPE as a way to enhance or reinforce the worker who is the first line of defense. We have to empower them to keep themselves and their coworkers safe through vigilance and accountability. So we need to think about investing in new technologies that maybe measures temperature as you walk in the door, or measures oxygen saturation, that measures wellness and safety, that thinks about flexible work at home, and training that really enables this worker in ways that we haven't done before.
Okay. Thank you, Joe, and of course, a very interesting point of view. What do you think, Urs? Do you think that people will be more able to use PPE after the crisis?
So thank you, Danny, for the question, and maybe one aspect, in addition to Joe's view at things here, is I think this crisis is an opportunity for the management of companies to become aware of the health of their staff. Will COVID-19 change the way workers think about PPE? My idea is stuff is reasonable if the boss is. So we know from behavioral safety studies that as soon as you can influence the management, as soon as you can lead a big company to a cultural change and look at safety, you can win. And you always win if the boss is super sensitive and convinced that he has to do everything about safety, and in that case also hygiene for the staff. So I think the stuff is reasonable if the boss is cool. And it's a time which should wake up bosses to take care of their good, their stuff. One aspect that we discuss at the moment that we see a little bit problematic when looking now at PPE and safety security equipment in industries, that people will tend to use more and more disinfection solutions. And the last 15 years brought a lot of technology to get rid of and dramatically reduce the use of disinfection in order to protect our skin, in order to protect products in assembly and other. If we get back to psychological super use of disinfection means and alcohols where we don't use them anymore, it may in some cases not be good for our health. Drying out skin, not protecting skin, and in some assembly lines, there will be problems coming up because of maybe alcohol in places where there shouldn't be. So one aspect is that we think the time should wake up the boss and then the stuff will follow, and that should be good for PPE. And the other is air, and in some industries, in some working sites, in some offices, the importance of fresh air in a room will change with COVID. This may have consequences to how we equip stuff and installations with humidity control, air vent control, even more than today. That's some aspects of that point, Danny, if it makes sense.
Of course, very interesting aspects that, of course, I haven't thought about. So thank you both for your point of view. I want you to think about another change that we have seen these days, and is that the fact that companies have been forced to adopt telework to allow people work since home. That for most people was not even an option in the past, even if, of course, it was a topic that was being analyzed and discussed in companies as a possibility to allow people to have a better balance between life and work. But the truth was that it wasn't a fact, at least. And now we see that it's become a reality suddenly. So regarding safety, when people's working at home, I think for me is a quite difficult matter. How we can guarantee the safety of a worker when he's working at home? Let's start at this point by Urs, for example. What do you think?
So my ideas here are safety at home is a tricky topic. How can we divide between a home injury and a home work injury? I think in that case, if something should happen, breaking your foot in the living room when working on the laptop, I think the insurances will find out case by case, yeah, and they will, yeah. The other is that we may help, and that may be the aspect of safety and health as a service. We may inform people. We may inform our staff in the companies, or in our case, in the research organization, of do's and don'ts at home. What I see here in Germany, it's our highest occupational health body who has this function. The occupational health insurances as well, and they are normally pretty good in my eyes at do's and don'ts at homework, work from home, and the special health risks that are linked to that. Looking at risks for the people at home, I don't see very much the home work injury challenge. What I see seems to be very much the psychology, stress and overwork risk, combined with the family stress risk. So it seems to be that our focus must be in the service to health and safety on the psychical side of things, with potential consequences to errors and aspects at work that are misleading. So I think in that case, it's more like an information service to the staff of have breaks, relax, air ventilation, breaks in between. Of course, we can be reasonable with good IT, and it's looking primarily, in my eyes, at the psychology and overwork risks from that, and the risks from screen work. So topics we don't have on the assembly line, and of course those people cannot normally do much at home. This is what I see mainly, and then the simple things. No, you don't need masks at home because you're at home, and all this. You should also inform that, very much down to earth, to inform the stuff about what do you have to do at home if I'm with family. And I think that is, in my eyes, most of what can be done right now. We see at the same time in our institution, it's a big one with 26,000 people, and also in smaller industries, the whole thing is new. Joe, you had mentioned all the infections and risks of the last years, but I think never the problem was challenged that systematically, internationally at the same time, raising so many questions. And I think we're all underway in development the process. There's no cooking book ready yet. That's my impressions.
Okay, thank you so much. The importance of informed staff and the importance of the psychological aspect. It's something, of course, to have in mind. Before going with Joe, I want to remember our attendants that they can make their questions in the tool that they have in the meeting. And of course, we will go through these questions at the end of the talk. Now, Joe, what do you think about that? how a company can guarantee the safety of a worker when he's not at the company, he's at home.
Yeah, and I think the pandemic has shown more people that they can easily work from home, right? Relying on emails, chats, and video conferencing with colleagues. But and many believe that a good portion of workers will not return back to physically working at an office. You know, so many who are currently at home will stay at home. So this problem or challenge is something that organizations will have to address right now, because it was an emergency response initially, but many of these workers will not come back. They will work from home. And I think there's a lot of challenges, right? Besides the ones we just talked about, and I'll save that for the end, but you know, regards to wellness and health and stress, but how are you going to deal with security and privacy? Are you going to have computers connected to your servers? Now, have you enabled vulnerabilities into your system? And now if you have 1,000 workers that are remote and they have logged into their computer and then left for 15, 20 minutes, and you've got many, many of those, what kind of vulnerability are you allowing? So those are big issues. How about fire safety? You know, electrical safety. Does the home have the correct code for electrical safety? Do they have the emergency procedures? Are they on a second floor or third floor, or in an apartment building on the 5th and 7th floor? Are you going to guarantee that they evacuate correctly? Now that you've got a worker at home, what are the workers' compensation rules? What are the occupational health and safety laws? These aren't questions that we need to eventually answer. These are questions we need to answer today, because you will have thousands of workers who will stay home. Now, on the issue of health and wellness, one study showed that loneliness on health increased risk of mortality by 29%. And that was from Perspectives on Psychological Science. 29%. So what is the impact then on that person and productivity on one hand? And then what is the impact now on the other hand of this huge health risk that you've introduced as a company? So I think we really need to look at all this. And the last thing I would say is, if you are going to have workers at home, you also must have a accountable, individualized health and wellness plan. You must, and it must be individualized. Why? Because every person is in a different situation now. That person may have 3 dogs and a grandma. Another worker may have grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, brothers and sisters living with them. So in other words, the environment is so different and work hours may have to be different. And so on top of that, we need to layer this health and wellness. So even on the management side, it really has to be individualized coaching versus management saying, this is the rule, this is how it's done, everybody do it this way. I don't think you can do that with remote workers. It has to be individualized. Okay, you start at 9 a.m. and you finish here. Okay, you start at 6 a.m. because of all of the issues at home. And so I think it might be good for workers in one sense, but I think it can be bad for workers long-term in terms of health and wellness. And in terms of management, same. You know, it could be good in some sense, but it could be bad in another. Having said all that, it's inevitable It's happening right now, and so we better have a plan today.
Okay. Yes. An individualized health and safety plan is a new thought that I've never think about. So thank you, you both. And well, let's go to a last question, only to not have an eternal debate today. But I'd like to talk about behavior. Well, for me, workers' behavior is the one of the most important aspects to have into account when we work in safety. And of course, all our careers we have been trying to assure or to make surer behaviors to have people that have surer behaviors in the workplace. I have been in workplaces these days, and I realized that people are acting carefully. People are acting as if there was a threat. That is, of course, we have the threat of corona, but they act safer in all the rest of the aspects of the work. So I wonder if this behavior will continue after this phase when all that is over, because I have seen that there are some companies that are even experimented a reduction in the accident ratios. So that's of course something, a very good consequence of all that, and I wonder if they will be permanent after that. What do you think? How will we behave at work when this is over? Will we be safer? What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, that's a tough question because we're talking about human behavior. So for that, I did some reading, and what I found is that many experts do believe that behavioral change will occur after the pandemic. Today, fear drives many changes. We know that. There's a lot of things we do today that are driven by fear and for self-protection. It's very normal. But if you look at history, you can see examples of long-lasting changes. For example, the 1918 influenza pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. We lost 50 million people globally. And many experts believe that a lot of the hygiene practices came out of that pandemic. Mm-hmm. Also, you know how when we cough, we go, or we use a napkin? Mm-hmm. That wasn't part of the etiquette before 1918. Before 1918, was okay. It wasn't considered bad. And today, if you did it, somebody may shoot you because you've got COVID-19. So we know from history that changes do occur. Another one is 9/11 here in the United States. Those attacks made profound changes in our behavior. For example, we have a saying here, and it may be the same for you. If see something, do something. See something, do something. So if we see a box that's just sitting there and nobody is claiming it, we will call 911. Or now we're taught, unfortunately here in the US, we have a lot of incidents with guns, right? Mm-hmm. And now we're taught that if somebody has a gun and they're getting ready to shoot, you attack them. And people actually do that. That is a radical change in behavior. Now, having said that, have long-lasting positive change, it has to be more than the individual. We really need new policies and regulations. Organization, industry, government really have a big responsibility to promote positive change. And this gets back to kind of my theme, which is the first line of defense in illness and safety in workers is the worker. And I think organizations and governments need to really empower the worker. Let me just cite one really crazy statistic. This is in the US, the Center for Disease Control maintains our official listing of losses and who and how. And I looked at it yesterday. I went to the Center for Disease Control yesterday. And what it said was 91% of everybody that's hospitalized in the United States had an underlying medical condition. 91% underlying. So what are they? Hypertension, obesity, chronic metabolic disease, cardiovascular disease. So 58% of people who were hospitalized due to COVID-19, 58, so almost 60% had hypertension. Half were obese. Half of all who are hospitalized are obese. 41% of everybody hospitalized in the US is diabetic. 33% had cardiovascular disease. And this made up the 91% of all who are hospitalized. So this gets back to what I said before, that you cannot think of safety without thinking of wellness. Wellness and safety must go hand in hand. Workers must be empowered to enhance their wellness. And organizations must institute positive change that protects workers. And so to me, those are the kind of the conclusions, yeah.
Thank you, Joe. Yes, so definitely fear change behaviors, that's something that it's definitely true. And the importance of wellness in the worker wellness to companies. That's two very important things to my opinion. What do you think, Urs? How will we behave after that?
So aspects that I may want to add to Joe's super overview is maybe aspects that I think hygiene at work should be positively influenced. Hygiene as a part of safety, hygiene as a part of prevention. I think we will have longer times of working with masks. We will learn hygiene-wise, I think, more and more from Southeast Asia. Maybe some shake hand behavior in the future will maybe continue towards a friendly Asian nodding. Yeah, maybe our shake hand behavior will change as well in a positive sense for hygiene. Yeah, but maybe differently. I see, as mentioned in the beginning, the start of overuse of disinfection with bad consequences for skin, for products to be assembled, and potentially also for PPE and clothing because of too much alcohol. Then the need for PPE, it may change. We may want to combine some disposable PPE products, maybe some gloves with more hygiene barriers. I already saw discussions about combining like clinical gloves with working gloves. I think this is a challenge. Yeah, you need breathability for comfort for good assembly. Yeah, but there will be more looks at masks for face shields and other. And then there is one change in the use of PPE. Over here around Stuttgart, companies start to produce masks themselves. They buy mask manufacturing machines, and they start in producing their own PPE. On the hygiene side, I think they will never enter into gloves because gloves is too difficult. So I think this aspect should, on the one side, move the management of companies in a positive sense for the awareness to hygiene, prevention, and as Joe mentioned, wellness. Mm-hmm. And that again should also be good for aspects of ergonomics and PPE and ergonomics. Other questions that we look into at the moment and also together, this is the aspect of like access checkpoints. Will we have like health checks at entry gates of companies? Will we have self-checks, self-information checks for staff for their own health, and enable more and more services for them? And the aspect, as Joe mentioned, if you see something, do something. The aspect of awareness in a cultural level in companies could be improved in these days. The fear level is still high. One aspect is at the same time that's already starting over here, health infos and privacy. Countries are looking at, hey, I need your data because it's for all our protection. And I'm happy that we have pretty good privacy laws in the meantime to protect the citizen. But you see the wish of states to grip of personal data. We see the discussions where the management asks for health data of their staff because they need it now, which is not possible, wonderfully, both in Spain and also here in Germany. Mm-hmm. So there is aspect of privacy and data discussions at the moment. But ideally, the culture in taking care of each other's health and the management maybe with having more a view at the staff health and the wellness aspects, that could be really a positive impulse out of that crisis. Because just remember, we're living in a time when this is over, where things can be so easily forgotten. Yeah? Does everyone discuss Brexit? Yeah. Ongoing? I don't think so. Yeah. So we are moving so much in topics, and of course we want to. Sure. Who wants to discuss Corona for the next 10 years? Yeah. We are like that, and it's also for our health. But there is a risk when fear goes down that we go back to old behavior, and we should use this time for raising the standards for staff health in these days.
Thank you very much, Urs. Thank you very much, Joe. So many interesting aspects that you both have mentioned. So I cannot make a list, but I think that attendees have make mental note of all that. Good to see as well the different points of view of people from different parts of the planet, as Joe in the US, in Phoenix, and Urs in Germany, even Marta in Poland, and me in Spain. So I think that it's good to have all these different opinions. To finish a bit, I only want to say that I think that to make these changes last, we have to work about them. We cannot wait for these changes to be permanent only like that. We need the management of companies and safety experts and innovation people to work in make this change permanent. Well, Marta, I think that we have finished. What do you can say us? Are there any question of the attendees?
Yes, they are. First one, working at home could cause that working hours extend until night. Should companies establish clear limits in working hours? Gentlemen?
Yeah,
Go ahead. Yeah.
Maybe I start. Companies do that, and they give out these limits. At the same time, it's not so easy for a company to act proactively to protect the stuff. Companies have to give out like at least paper timesheets to be fulfilled, and they have to inform, and they have to tell about working hours. But for reasons of data privacy, of opportunities not to get in touch maybe with super protective VPN, other tunnel systems, I think the most is to inform, to enable the documentation also in paper, and of course the company is responsible.
Thanks. What about you, Joe?
Yeah, maybe I would say that companies should also consider kind of looking at new ways of assessing productivity and performance that doesn't take time into consideration, other than saying this is due by this date. And then the reason I say that is, again, every situation, remote situation, is so different from one to the next that I really do believe it has to be coaching at an individual level. So instead of managers managing, I think they need to be coaches, and individualized coaching, I think, is the way the US at least is thinking about remote work in the future.
Yeah, thanks. I completely agree with you both. I mean, I think that we already were in a change situation. I mean, we were already going to a different way of assessing productivity of people. That was a concept that already were in the mind of companies and managers, and of course this change between coaches and managers in the past, coaches in the present and in the future. So I think that all that will boost a little bit the speed of this change. And we definitely will have different ways to assess how to assess productivity of people in the workplace.
Okay, gentlemen, then I have a question that is coming up from, and that question has been raised in different forms. We've been talking during the previous meetings with people from the US dealing with people analytics. Last week, we've been talking to the manager from Google. Trust as a fundament of safety and data privacy. Because even my sports watch, it gathers data such as saturation and how many times I breathe during a minute. So already all the wearables that most of us wear, in some way and form, they are tracking our vital data, and they are collected somewhere. Most of the people don't even think about it. But then when it comes to the governments trying to control data, and also companies, because bear in mind, we're going from a world where 2 months ago, most companies would allow somebody coughing in with a cold within the office, apart from Japan, where the culture is strict. You don't go sick to the office. In Europe and in the US, you have a job to do, and you just have to go and perform. So are you telling me that we're moving in 2 months, of course, through a hell of a fear, from a culture of absolutely accepting and not sending people away home when they're visibly sick and contagious, to a culture where we're gonna measure the temperature, and if it's 37 degrees centigrade, we're gonna say, I'm sorry, Marta, you have to work at home today. Do you really believe that's gonna happen?
So one aspect that we're discussing for years, discussing severe accidents in dangerous workplaces like on oil and gas fields. When you discuss fatalities and the reasons for severe accidents, there is potential in checking health for the sake of stuff instead of the function, because the job is so dangerous and so difficult and so responsible, like checking lines and pipes in a gas and oil field, that there have been accidents, there have been fatalities that could be traced back to a flu and the person not really being healthy prior to a dangerous job. And there were already the discussions of having access inside the company to several areas. Should there be a health check in before, otherwise doors won't accept opening. And this, I think, will become more and more important now. The aspect is, what we cannot do is, hey, Jody, you're sick, please work from home. No. We'll send her home. Yes, I think in some parts of this planet in the future, we'll send her home and that you're off sick. But we don't send home for homework.
Joe?
I think the answer is that what the science and data shows is that, yes, you should separate that person from the rest of the group because of issues with transmission. So that's one. So infectious diseases. It could even just be the flu, just regular flu, right? Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, in the U.S. kills 40,000 people a year. A good number of people die from the flu in the U.S. So that's one piece of it. But we know from science and data, just like Urs mentioned, that if you are ill, that your risk in safety goes way, way up. So imagine somebody who's ill gets into a truck and has an accident. In the US, a major accident costs $1.3 million per accident, and we probably have 80,000 of those. So I think as soon as we can capture the ROI of sending a person home versus keeping that person there, businesses will start to adopt more and more a kind of a well-rounded approach that is much more than just, oh, I need to get this task done today, therefore you're going to stay and get this task done. But what they don't understand is that person stayed there and got that task done, but now affected everybody else. Plus, that task got done below standard, so it's no good anyways. I think we need to kind of really have a process that is much more broad in thinking. And that has a lot to do with digital transformation. That has to be change in culture in the workplace. And I think it's happening. I could tell you in the US, it is slowly kind of happening, that digital transformation, management change. Managers are becoming coaches. We're losing a lot of the middle management and a lot of the kind of the overall management is turning into coaches. So it is slowly happening.
Thanks both. I think as I told before, that we have to take advantage of the moment, and this is one of the aspects in which we can take advantage. If we work enough and we work in making good changes of this pandemic lasting, of course we will have a better world after that. So that can be one of the aspects that we have to work about, how we act, how we behave when we are sick and we have to work, and how companies see how we behave when we are sick and we go work or we stay at home. So I think that this is definitely one of the aspects that we should take advantage and make it last.
Okay, another question. Joe, you said about pre-symptomatic PPE, because now we're sort of, everybody's afraid of the virus, and we're sort of, and it's 3 miles ahead of us, because as soon as we know that somebody is infecting others, it's a bit late. So in terms of the, we're talking a lot today about this soft safety and behavioral-based safety, but what about do you think that the current situation, when this is over, will boost for specific innovation in hardware technology? Is there anything that you think could stem out of this?
Yeah, actually, we're working with ITURRI on one of those examples today. What we know is that based on studies with Fitbit data, 200,000 sets of Fitbit data, there's a high correlation between things like resting heart rate and hours of sleep and onset of influenza-like illnesses. We also know from recent data that resting heart rate of a COVID-19 carrier or patient, even though they're not symptomatic, dramatically increases. And their oxygen saturation levels go down dramatically. In other words, there are a lot of telltale signs of influenza, of COVID-19. And so we are looking at sensors and wearable sensors to track those, to see if we can provide that information to the worker before the onset of symptoms. So something like 72 hours before the onset of symptoms, we say, hey, you're gonna get sick. And based on Fitbit data and in the US research, we're able to make those predictions with correlation of as high as 97%. So that's happening, and ITURRI is participating in that with us.
Yeah. It looks like magic.
Urs, would you like to comment on it?
You're mute, Urs.
Sorry. Well, what Joe was mentioning is what we're looking more and more. This is a tradition that started in the UK and then went to the US and is only about to land in Europe. That is behavioral safety, behavior-based safety. And one aspect is the brain-based behavioral safety and the vital parameter-based safety, that we take fatigue, tiredness as objectifiable components into safety procedures, not just look at fences, red lines, yellow lines, whatever, and that the boot doesn't slip, but to take human behavior into account in order to protect the people. And the approaches of Joe's company here are a milestone in this field of behavior-based safety based on physical measures that can help in decision-making companies and in changing processes and cultures.
Okay, gentlemen, we only have time for one more. So there is a good question. We are in a global pandemic. We have different safety standards for the United States, for the European community, for Asia, for everywhere. So even specialists get lost in safety standards, even though everybody's having a fast track education on the certification of masks. We have a number of knockoff goods which are coming into the markets without valid certification. So two questions about it. Do you think that the current situation should call for standardization of the safety standards? And secondly, when you talk about behavioral-based safety, this is more like preventive maintenance for people. Do you think for the future this should also be somewhat standardized?
Joe, do you want to start? Do you have an opinion?
Yeah, sure. I think I've been doing some reading on kind of what is this causing globally? And I think what is causing globally, like the pandemic, is not standardization and globalization, but actually the reverse. Isolationism, nationalism. What did we do? We all closed down our borders. And in the US, you can't even go from New York to Connecticut without getting stopped. So I'm afraid that we're going to tend towards not as positive, even though standards, in my mind, already exist. We have ISO standards, we have IC, IEEE, AS, we have standards, but a lot of them are nationally driven. And I'm afraid that we're actually going to go in the other direction.
One positive aspect that I see these days, because I'm in contact with that committee that recommended here in Germany to stop for a certain time that face masks need a CE certificate, but that without having that for a certain time, masks with a certificate from the US, Canada, and other would be directly used and could be used. What I see is an amazing agility in institutions where I thought they got stuck 10 years ago in over-administration. And I see a very positive agility in difficult times. There was an aspect here with an European view where different countries worked in a different way. There's a lot of communication about problems and challenges like never before. And I see agility at some areas, which is very positive.
I agree that institution has moved quickly, much more quickly than we expected to move. So that's really a good point for them. But I share the pessimistic point of view of Joe in this aspect. I don't think that we will get global standards for all that we need. But of course, it could be an opportunity to talk about it and to make institutions think about it.
Okay, gentlemen, we're almost out of time, but before we go, when this is over, is a positive, or it tries to be a positive initiative. So we're trying to look for the upsides of the situation that we've been forced into. So if I could ask, just to wrap it up from each of you, one sentence about safety when this is over. Do you think there's anything positive, and how to take this experience into a positive way?
Who wants to start?
So I may mention that I think it is a good chance for cultural changes in institutions to take care of the own stuff.
And yeah, for me, I think it's that we need to empower our first line of defense, which is the worker, towards safety and wellness, and they go together.
for me, we have a huge opportunity of adopt the good changes that this pandemic has brought to our lives. So let's do it. Let's see what are the good aspects of the pandemic, as for example change of behaviors, and let's work on them to make them last.
Okay, thank you so much. That was indeed positive. Thank you to all our participants. Thank you so much for joining us at When This Is Over and discussing safety today. I would like to thank our guests. Gentlemen, it's been a fantastic pleasure. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
And thank you very much.
Bye.